We begin tonight in the alpine town of Davos, a small, quiet and picturesque upmarket ski resort in Switzerland, where President Trump has told the World Economic Forum that the United States is seeking immediate negotiations to acquire Greenland. But he said he won't use force to take it. He praised the people and leaders of Denmark, which has sovereignty over the Arctic island, but said only the US could defend it. Before Mr. Trump's arrival in the Swiss resort, European leaders had rebuked America's designs on the Danish territory, saying it was upending the world order. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said Europe must speed up its push for independence to defend itself in an increasingly lawless world. She said the shift in the international order was not only seismic, but permanent, and Europe needed to abandon its traditional caution. But it was Donald Trump, the America First president, on stage for over an hour in Davos, who was the center of attraction, though the audience listened to him in stony silence as he listed his grievances and his achievements.
They have an excellent, by the way, Secretary General, who's possibly in the room. Mark, are you here? Yes, he's here. Hello, Mark. We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. It's the United States alone that can protect this giant mass of land, this giant piece of ice, develop it and improve it and make it so that it's good for Europe and safe for Europe and good for us. And that's the reason I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States, just as we have acquired many other territories throughout our history, as many of the European nations have. They've acquired, there's nothing wrong with it. But this would not be a threat to NATO. This would greatly enhance the security of the entire alliance, the NATO alliance. The United States is treated very unfairly by NATO. I want to tell you that. We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland, where we already had it as a trustee, but respectfully returned it back to Denmark not long ago after we defeated the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, and others in World War II. We gave it back to them. We were a powerful force then, but we are a much more powerful force now.
We must deal with the world as it is now. Which brings me to the second reality and imperative for Europe, and that is to speed up our push for independence. Whether in our economy, or on our security, whether on technology or democracy, we have to be strong in shaping ourselves if we don't want to shape the world around us. In this increasingly lawless world, Europe needs its own levers of power, and we know them: a strong economy, a thriving single market, one that can do business in different markets and can compete all around the world, a strong innovation and technology capacity, united societies with high levels of education, talent and health systems, and above all, a real capacity to defend ourselves. This is what European independence is all about. It is not about anyone else.
And that's the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen there, and before her, President Trump. Well, monitoring all that's been happening in Davos. From Davos is Arise Business anchor Rotus Odiri and special correspondent James Blue also joins me on the line from Baltimore. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Let me come to you first, Rotus. So President Trump making landfall in Davos, and all the people there braced for impact. Before his arrival, his remarks had already caused chaos in diplomatic relations. So what was his message today?
Good evening, Charles. Good evening to all our viewers out there. I love the extreme weather metaphor. It's very apt. Look, the only major takeaway from today from President Trump is that he's taking off military action off the table with respect to Greenland. And Charles, I really want all our viewers to know this. Many people think President Trump doesn't answer to anyone. He answers to two entities: the American people and the markets. Because yesterday, and he acknowledged this today in his speech, the markets fell on fears of possible military action in Greenland. The Prime Minister of Greenland, John Frederick Nielsen, said in a quote that, we are prepared for anything because we think, he says, and he mentioned Trump by name, he says the leader of the other side has not taken military action off the table. Stock markets fell, the dollar weakened, bond yields in particular rose, and Trump acknowledged that today. So that's the reason why he came out, I think, and said, hey, listen, it's a negotiation going forward. So, but other than that, it was a domestic speech, Charles. It was really interesting to come to an international audience and talk about U.S. housing, U.S. stock markets, affordability and things like that. But the main takeaway for the international audience, he did mention Venezuela. He says he's going to make Venezuela prosperous and other things. But mainly Greenland was the big story.
Rotus, thank you very much indeed for that. I'll come back to you in a minute. And I'm glad you actually mentioned the markets, because I was going to ask you that, because that's always a way of gauging reaction. They took, as you said, a nosedive yesterday over threats of military force in his desire for Greenland. But James in Baltimore, good to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's just refer to that rather news-making comment that Mr. Trump made in his speech, saying he doesn't want to use force in Greenland, and then he said that he won't use force in Greenland, which obviously sounded reassuring. I mean, how significant is that?
Well, I think it is significant, Charles. I'm really glad to be here with you and our viewers. I think the key, and Rotus is right, it was a domestic focus speech. But what Donald Trump is doing is sort of reshaping the way the world needs to think about the United States. And so he used this international forum to really speak about the priorities that he as president has. And yes, Greenland is at the very top of that, but all of these sort of domestic issues, which he thinks are far more important than many of the international things that he's been working on, are really what he's trying to drive home. I do think the headline that he will not use force is very, very important. However, I think he is going to use everything up to military action to get exactly what he wants. And in many ways, if the US is able to find some way to grab portions of Greenland, people are already starting to call it the 51st state. It'll be very interesting to see if his strategy has actually worked. I think the prospect of NATO troops on the ground in Greenland against US forces was really, really sort of stunning. And obviously the markets responded. But I think President Trump has pulled back, but he's pulled back and there's a lot of glass still on the floor. And I think the Western alliance, as we know it, is really, really broken and done.
Okay, thanks for that, James. I'll come back to you in a minute, but let me go to you over in Davos, Rotus. I mean, it's interesting that Mr. Trump talked about negotiations over Greenland. But I mean, one wonders what kind of negotiations he's talking about, because the Americans can already do what they want on Greenland. I mean, they can certainly negotiate with Denmark to do more. So really, it sounds like for him, it's a question of ownership, isn't it? But that's not really up for negotiation, because Denmark doesn't want it and the Greenlanders don't want it either. So is it clear to you what he thinks he's going to achieve?
Not really at this point, Charles, but it's important to also keep in mind that he still is wielding the tariff hammer over the heads of his European allies. So even though he's taken off the threat of military action, he still has a tariff in place on the UK, a number of other nations, I think France and the rest, with respect to an EU and with respect to what's going on in Greenland. And here's the thing, he's been saying that he doesn't want Greenland to fall into the hands of China and Russia. Okay, well, they're a NATO partner, I mean, through Denmark. If you feel that your neighbor, in a sense, I know they're separated by an ocean, if your neighbor is under threat from someone else, you can partner with them. You don't have to take over their property to protect them. So where these negotiations go going forward, I'm not sure, but the tariffs are still there.
I have to say, Rotus, I love the way you put that, because that really is what is happening. I mean, it's extraordinary that he wants to take over the property in order to defend the property. But let me come to you, James. Beyond Greenland, I mean, it was a wide-ranging speech which, went off script a little bit. And of course, you mentioned NATO earlier. That came up. He said NATO countries need to be able to defend themselves. I wonder if you could talk us through that, because NATO countries have developed to complement each other, and there's an integration of the military alliance. But he says that the US has given everything and got nothing out of NATO. How would you put that in context?
Well, I think in context, President Trump is absolutely mistaken and wrong. NATO has been one of the greatest military alliances in the world. And, don't forget, Charles, NATO was in Afghanistan in a very new mission, really supporting the US effort there. NATO has sort of been spreading democracy and defending democracy throughout Europe. President Trump has a very different view of the world and the way the world should be than all other presidents. And he is moving to reshape the world where the US's role in NATO is greatly reduced. He's speaking about NATO becoming an entity because he spoke about NATO and the US as sort of separate items. And so he's creating and thinking of a world where NATO exists without the US support. I think Europe must be very nervous at this moment. I think there was a lot of words yesterday, speeches, the speech by Carney from Canada, the speech by Emmanuel Macron. I think Europe is aware that the tides are turning. And I think that President Trump is trying to really give this world a sense of how he wants it to be recreated and how he wants it to be structured. And it's really on his terms alone. And I really believe that this is just such a pivotal moment in the world order. And it'll be very interesting on the balance of his visits, the extent to which heads of states and heads of companies really try to sort of meet him and curry favor. I mean, what is really true, and Rotus just mentioned it, the tariff threat is profound. And he has used tariffs in a way that has really been retaliatory. And we will see the sort of Supreme Court is judging whether he has that power, but he's threatened to do the same unless he gets his way with Greenland. And so we'll see. As you'll note in the speech, he did not remove the tariff threat. I think it really does remain. And I think it's the ways that he believes at the end of the day, he's going to be able to get exactly what he wants.
Well, I mean, business experts like Rotus say he uses tariffs to escalate, to de-escalate. But let me come to you, Rotus, in Davos there. Mr. Trump, of course, was on stage for over an hour at that World Economic Forum. He was the center of attraction. But did you get the sense that the audience listened to him in rather stony, cold silence as he listed his grievances and his achievements?
Yeah, I mean, how do I describe this? They laughed at some of the things he said, but it felt, I have to be honest with you, I was in the room, in the hall when he was speaking. It felt like they were laughing at one point. And there was one particular part of his speech where I mean, this was a domestic thing. He made it a domestic thing. He started talking about Minnesota and how Washington, D.C. is now the safest, region in the country, safest state in the city in the country. And then he comes to Minnesota and talks about how they're resisting ICE agents and so on. And then he made a very tactless, and if I have to say, racist remark about Somalians, because of course he's had this ongoing beef with Ilhan Omar, a representative from Somalia, who is, of course, representative from Minnesota, representing Minnesota, but she's from Somalia, saying that, oh, I guess their IQ. And a couple people booed him, and there were audible gasps in the audience. It was generally, I would say, a mild to cold reception that he got there while he was. Walked out. Our head of our technical team, Evika here, was telling us that some folks from the NATO contingent, I think Tony Blair, walked out within about 5 to 6 minutes of him beginning his speech. So he's alienated his allies, I have to say, with regards to Europe. I quickly want to throw this in, Charles. On the tariff side, I just want to remind our viewers that the Supreme Court of the United States is looking at the legality of IEEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. And according to betting markets, there's like a 1 in 4 chance that they're going to rule in favor of Trump. We'll see what happens. So that ruling could come anytime this week. If they rule against him, he still has some options, some other more narrow, minute tariffs to use. But that takes away a lot of the negotiations.
Okay, I think we lost Rotus there, which is rather a bit of a shame because he was making a very important point. But one last question to you, James Blue in Baltimore. Ahead of Mr. Trump making the speech, and I think you touched on it earlier, we had a lot of strong language from other leaders basically referring to a new world order. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was saying they can't be nostalgic about the rules-based order of the past. I mean, how do you think this Trump speech will be going down with him and European leaders as well? You think they know now what to expect?
Well, I think they certainly are very clear this is what Trump is doing. And again, it'll be very interesting to see his remaining time at Davos, whether they try to curry favor, whether they try to get some side deals. Reporting from one of our Arise colleagues that Tony Blair walked out of the meeting within 6 or 7 minutes of the speech. Now, Sir Blair is a member of this peace group that President Trump has conscripted, so maybe that doesn't portend well for that. I think what we have is just a real sort of seismic shift. And, it's not coincidental that just yesterday, the U.S. Military announced that they would be withdrawing from certain NATO actions and functions and exercises. So what you have in the course of 1 week is the complete turning over, the complete remaking. And yes, President Trump has stepped back from military force, but the world as we knew it does not exist anymore. And I think the Europeans and the other allies who have been steadfast in their allegiance to the US will really have to kind of question, does it get us anything? And will it last? And will it deliver? To have one of your strongest allies threaten you with both tariffs and military force, despite the fact that it's been pulled back, is a very, very new situation. And I don't think we've been here before.
Indeed, James. And just before we go, let's return to Davos and to Rotus Odiri, who, apologies, Rotus, I think the gremlins of technology got us there in the middle of what you were saying. So if you'd like to complete your thought, and that'll be our final thought from you there in Davos.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not sure why I got cut off, but and apologies on this side. But yeah, really quickly, the reception was kind of cold. He made a kind of racist remark about Ilhan Omar, who is somebody he's been beefing with in Minnesota for a while. They was booed for that, and then the Supreme Court is likely to rule on tariffs, and we'll see what happens with the legality of that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Most illuminating talking to you both. Arise business anchor Rotus Odiri, who joined us from Davos, and of course, Arise special correspondent James Blue, who is on the line there from Baltimore. Thank you very much indeed.